All right, welcome to the Afterlight. I am your host, Lauren Grace, and I'm joined today by Debra Schaffer. So let's meet our guest. Deb has been passionate about all things beautiful for her entire life. Yes, me too, girl. She has owned a successful interior design firm in the Washington, D.C. area for over 20 years. And for the last 15, she's been combining her two loves, beauty and spirituality, gradually phasing out of design and full-time into enchanted botanicals. As the spiritual herbalist, she now works with the energetic and magical properties of the plant world, formulating them into candles, incense, and other products to enhance a person's spiritual practice. She combines downloads from spirits with gifts from Mother Earth. She is a Reiki Master-Teacher, an Animal Reiki Master-Teacher, and practices the art and science of Energy Alchemy, which balances the energy relationship between people and the land they live on. She can be reached by email at hello@enchanted-botanicals.com, but I will definitely give you all of Deb's contact information in the show notes as well. So Deb is joining me today to talk about energy alchemy and all things plants. Hi, Deb. Thank you so much for being on the show.
So nice to be here, a whole half world away.
I know, that's right. I think sometimes people get confused, but I'm a Canadian living in Australia and you're an American living in the States. So it's so wonderful that we get to connect, through the power of the internet. Now, today we're going to be diving into the exciting, I guess you could say category or theme of energy alchemy and all things plants. Now, Deb, I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm actually a bit green on the subject myself, no pun intended.
Okay.
I am not super familiar with energy alchemy, so I'm really looking forward to learning all about it. Before we get started, you did sort of mention, or I mentioned in your bio off the top of the show, that you've always loved beautiful things. And it's so great to see that you've created an entire world and a business for yourself where you were able to combine that with, the land and nature. But how did you sort of first get into the world of plants? Were you always drawn to them?
I always was. One of my earliest memories is of planting little tiny zinnias when I was, I had to be probably 11. My dad was in the Navy and he was a Navy pilot, so we moved around a lot and moved to Virginia when I was 11. And that was really my earliest memory of planting seeds for myself. And I always helped my mom plant her tomato plants, and she had this neat little trick of surrounding the tomato plants with marigold, because the concept was that the smell of the marigold would keep the bugs away. And I don't know that it ever really worked, but I remembered it.
It looked beautiful.
It did look very pretty. But really, one of my favorite earliest memories was of going to the garden center and just going through all the seed packets and picking out the really pretty ones and getting to plant my own little plot of ground, which was maybe 3 feet long by 6 inches wide. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough for an 11-year-old to start with.
That's so wonderful. I feel that you're, lucky that you kind of got off on, the right foot, so to speak, starting at 11, learning how to, work with plants, understanding them, even understanding the balance of, the predators coming in for the plants and trying to do anything you can to kind of protect them and help them thrive. When you were talking, I was thinking about how there are so many people in the world who identify with not having a green thumb or not being able to nurture and grow plants. And I know that you were, mentioning that, you were sort of taught this from a young age, that your mother, that she showed you the way. So is it kind of like a hereditary thing that people are just naturally good at working with plants, or can you learn the art?
You can definitely learn the art. Trust me, the only thing my mom knew how to plant was tomatoes.
Okay.
And
marigolds.
Marigolds, right. But going a couple of generations back, my great grandmother came over from Lithuania and had a beautiful garden at along the seashore. And I think she passed her love of plants down to my grandmother, who was able to living in the city of Philadelphia with a very small little plot, grew beautiful roses. And the gene kind of missed my mom. And I'm really blessed that it landed on me. Um, so I actually have in my gardens now about 3 dozen, a little more than 3 dozen peony plants that have been passed down through the women in my family. I've got my grandmother's lilac bushes. Um, so I'm blessed that I consider my grandmother, my Nana, my guide from the other side right now, because I do feel like she's guiding my hands and my heart in what I'm doing. But for anyone who's listening, if you don't have a green thumb, if you don't have your own plot of land, really it could be as simple as maybe a little rosemary plant on your windowsill. Because what I do is I call myself a spiritual herbalist. So I've got a certification in medical herbalism, but I really prefer to work with the energetic, the spiritual, or magical properties of the plants. And very often they're a parallel path. Um, and if you'd like, I can give an example of that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you think about the herb Echinacea. So when people are feeling a little bit run down, maybe they feel like they've got a cold coming on, they'll grab an Echinacea tablet and start taking that to boost their immune system.
Yeah.
So that's the medicinal path. On the parallel um, spiritual herbalism path, you would turn to Echinacea when you want to boost your sense of internal power, your willpower, your sense of strength in your core. Um,
Love
you can
that.
do, yeah. So, and you can do this really without growing it. Everybody's, these days can Google just about anything. Um, So maybe you've got access to some dried echinacea. Maybe you grow some in your garden. Feel free to work with the petals or the leaves. Or I once heard an herbalist say that there are no important parts of a plant. In medical herbalism, a lot of the medicinal goodness might come from only the roots or only the petals. But in spiritual herbalism, we can work with the entire plant because we're not necessarily taking it internally, we're working with it in a relationship. So,
Right.
yeah, so you learn what I encourage people to do is don't get confused by all of the books, because you'll see one author that says, well, mint is only good for this or that, or definitely use mint for protection. But what happens if you don't have mint? What happens if you don't like mint? You're
Yeah.
not going to have a very good friendship with mint. So maybe you've got access to rose. Um, Rose is very protective if you think about the thorns that are on a rose.
Of course.
Right there. That's a very
Yeah.
protective plant. Any of the brambles, blackberry, raspberry, have thorns. Those might be your protective go-to. Um, and
Yes. We
and now
have bougainvilleas in Australia, and
here you
they are
go.
incredible, and they've got thorns. I never once thought
Exactly.
about them being,
Yes.
wow.
So what you might want to do in that case, if you wanted to do just some energetic work. Some people might call it a spell. Some people might call it a prayer, an intention. Whatever your comfort zone is, you do you. But you might want to gather some of those bougainvillea petals, which are so pretty.
Yeah.
My sister was in Arizona for a while and sent me just bags of the prettiest petals. And I did realize a little too late that they've got some thorns on them. Not the
Yeah.
petals necessarily, but the parts that she sent me. But again, feel free to go towards whatever aspect of that plant is calling to you. So you may like to pick a few of those petals, put them in a pretty bowl on your desk. If you create an altar, put them in a pretty offering bowl on your altar with the intention that the spirit of bougainvillea is going to help you set boundaries, that will protect you, say, in a sticky situation that you know you might be getting into. Um, yeah, so
That's so
that's how I work
fascinating.
with plants.
I love that. When you were talking, Deb, you kind of made me, you kind of reminded me, I guess, that, plants have an energy, and it's almost like, I know
Exactly.
you're talking about the spiritual, kind of meaning that they can, help, what they can help us with, I guess, but
Mhm.
they seem to have their own spirit as well, their own almost personality, for lack
Personality.
of a better word. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I've
Yeah.
recently wrote and published a book, and in it, it's 28 chapters, and each chapter has a plant that I grow in my garden. And part of what I've done is talk about what do they whisper to me. And again, I'll reference back to
Beautiful.
other authors, and I'm not knocking anybody. This is just my school of thinking,
Yeah.
is that they will tell me one thing, they might tell you another thing. Neither one is right or wrong. But what I encourage everyone to do is run that feeling that you get, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word. I think a feeling is a very valid word. Um,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
so run that feeling through your own filter. How does it make you feel? Um,
Yes.
because when we are in our own power zone, our own personal magic, it's all about feeling comfortable and confident and powerful. And we get there through um, our own striving, our own work, not what necessarily someone else is going to tell me, because that
Yeah.
fits them, but it may
Yeah.
not fit me. Because as energetic beings, and the plants, like you mentioned, are energetic beings, they just
Yeah.
look a little different than we do. And they're
Yeah.
not necessarily wired with vocal cords, which doesn't mean that they can't in some way communicate to each other or with us.
So
So,
beautiful. For some reason, it's making me emotional thinking about it. So, like, your passion is really coming through, Deb. I'm really
don't
feeling
make me
that.
cry
It's just,
now.
yeah, it's so funny how it's so beautiful. Oh, anyway,
Well,
it's so funny that
it's
I'm just
lovely
feeling
when
that. But yeah,
there are these concepts out there that, how do we know until somebody brings it up?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, so I love the thought that maybe some of your other listeners will now be like, oh gosh, I'm going to go out and, hug a tree
yeah,
and talk to my zinnias and, pick some bougainvillea petals and get
yeah.
magical, baby.
Exactly. It's so awesome. One of our last episodes, I actually interviewed a woman about numerology. And one of the things that, she was talking about was kind of exactly what you said, which is feeling out what numbers connect to you. And I think that we probably, living in the day and age where Google is kind of always our default, where, I'll read like a tarot card and I'll look up the meaning of
Right.
it, as opposed to trying to connect with what it's saying to me.
Exactly.
You've kind of hit the nail on the head in the sense of, you know, working with plants is an opportunity for us to get clear, to be intuitive, to listen, to feel to what we need to nurture ourselves. Because I think that a lot of people, if they go to a garden center, after listening to this conversation, if they actually take time to maybe breathe and be with themselves, they might be drawn to a particular plant or color or flower strictly because they're listening to their
Yes.
intuition.
Exactly. Exactly. Just listen to your soul. It's not going to steer you wrong.
Yeah.
So, and
So,
you may be drawn to something, you don't know why, but you take it home and you plant it and you nourish it, and then suddenly something happens and you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's why, Artemisia came into my life," or whatever it is. But,
yes.
life is just full of those beautiful synchronicities, and plants are a big part of that, or they
Yeah.
can be.
And the tools as well. Like I sometimes think that, or I know that Mother Earth has really given us everything that we need to heal ourselves and to connect with our spirit and our higher self, I think. And so what you're kind of talking about is, there's this untapped world for many people. Like for me, I haven't spent a lot of time. My partner's, he's always the one with the green thumb and going out and doing that. And I've always been drawn to the beauty of plants, but it's only up till recently, which is one of the reasons why I discovered you on Instagram, where I was like really just interested in learning more and nurturing that part of myself. When did you sort of start to realize that plants had this power, had this spiritual, sort of gift that they were able to give? Did you work with a plant and then realize that you were manifesting things in your life, after you'd kind of brought it into your life? Or did you kind of start with medical herbalism like you started and then move into the spiritual part?
Well, here's the funny thing. Actually, none of that. Um, I kind of came late to the game, actually. I was diagnosed about 15 years ago with a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And my oncologist at the time um, said to me, "Let's see if we can get you to 2 years." And I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" I mean, I
Wow.
thought people were getting treated, women were getting treated
Yeah.
and living through this, and not with the kind that I had. And the day of my first surgery, our son started his first day of 8th grade. So I remember shortly after that, I remember where I sat, what I was wearing, and I struck a deal with God. And I said, "Listen, um, I'm not ready. I'm okay if I have to check out, but I am not ready for my son to be motherless. And so let's see what we can do about this." And here I am, 15 years later. I am so healthy. I was fortunately in a clinical trial for a new drug protocol, which is now standard for that type of breast cancer. I, when I turned 49, my dad said to me, he looked me straight in the eye and he said that I was now the oldest living female ever on his side of the family. And again, I said, "How
Oh,
can this be? How can I be 49?"
goosebumps.
And just hearing about this. So I went back to my surgeon and I said, "Double mastectomy right now," because I still have 30 or 40 years, where
Yeah.
I could get the more regular kind of breast cancer.
Right.
And best decision I ever made, best decision. And so from there, it was just like, that I don't know what poet it was, Rumi or someone who said, "When you crack open, that's where the light comes in."
Yeah.
And that was my crack. And so I feel like that little seed inside the pod, and all of these things just started being put in front of me. And I became a feng shui master, which at the time jived really well with my interior design business. And then I started studying with a couple of gentlemen in the UK, learning how to work with energy lines and clearing them so that the people that live above them are living their lives, their health, their emotions in balance with the energy that naturally flows through the land. So that's what I turned into my energy alchemy practice. And so and in fact, I just did a client in Australia. All of my work is remote, but I was looking for some products. I didn't know if it was going to be candles or incense, or didn't really know what I was looking for, but I felt like there was something out there that would help me with the meditation aspect of it.
Mm.
And to be honest, I couldn't find anything that vibed with me. It either felt a little too dark or a little too spooky or not strong enough. And I get a lot of my inspiration, and the word inspiration literally comes from the words that mean to be in spirit. So when we're inspired, we
I never
are,
thought about that
I know,
before.
we are in spirit. We are communicating with spirit,
Yeah.
with God, universe, whatever you call that creator force. So I get a lot of my inspiration, my downloads, when I'm walking, when I'm just, baking or doing whatever.
Yeah.
And so I kind of was mulling it over in my head, like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to find these products that I feel like I need to find? And Spirit came in and said, girl, you got these gardens out there. Let's make something. And so I picked some flowers and I put together a dried incense, and I loved it. And then I started making more. And then I started with the candles. And one thing led to another. And here's Enchanted Botanicals.
I love
So
it. I love it. And
it's
spoiler
it's
alert for our listener at home, Deb, your candles are like next level. Just
thank you.
they are.
Well, and let me tell you, spoiler alert, how I get um my formulas are literally, quite literally, a download. Again, I get in a hit of inspiration, and they'll be like, okay, we want you to make a peace candle. This one was brilliant. So I was like, peace candle. Okay. And generally, when I go to start formulating a candle, I do a little meditation. I connect with my spirit guides, my angels, and we go down the list of herbs, crystals, oils in my apothecary. And they literally will tell me, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, yes, down to the number of drops of essential oils. And
Wow.
so here was peace. I had the labels, I had the jars, wax all ready to go, couldn't get a thing on it. So I tabled it, went on to a couple of others, and then all of a sudden it was like she was calling to me. And this will give me chills just talking about it. I was raised Catholic, and so as part of the Catholic faith, the Blessed Mother is a strong figure. And to me, she is one of those strong goddess figures. She came in and personally channeled that formula to me. And
Wow.
it's about being at peace with yourself. I mean, of course, it could be world peace, but that feels a little bit bigger than me. But we can
Yeah.
be at peace with ourselves, with decisions, with relationships. And so, yeah, that's how peace came about. It was pretty special. pretty powerful.
I can't, yeah, I can only imagine. So, for our listener at home who might be learning about some of the things that we're talking about for the first time, some might be very familiar, but can we just kind of talk a little bit about the download comment that you
Yeah.
made? So, when you're talking about your downloading information, is the kind of easiest way to explain that you get ideas or impressions in your head and then you basically credit them to spirit?
Yes, yes, that's very, very well said. So I have never considered myself psychic. Um, I do admit now that I'm probably highly intuitive, which is
Yes.
not to say that almost everybody is, if they'll allow that their personal magic to open up and be so. Um, but it's something that we can develop and something that we probably have developed over many lives. And if I like to tell people, if you're doing something that is really fun for you now, then you've probably done it in more than one lifetime. So, but yeah, the downloads are quite literally a feeling. It's almost like this little thought pops into my head where I know it's not me
Yeah.
because on my jars of herbs, in a true medicinal apothecary, they might have on the labels, it would state that it's a warming herb, it's a carminative herb, it's antiviral, antibacterial. Those are all medicinal properties.
Right.
And in my apothecary on the jar, I have, of course, what the name is. Um, Very important because once they're dried, so many of them look like the other.
Each other.
Uh,
Yeah.
right. So I've got what I call my materia magica. And so I've got on the label that this herb might be good for protection or manifesting or for wealth or um, financial abundance or hex breaking, which, P.S., I don't do hexes, but every now and then you kind of feel like you need to get rid
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I have on my labels. And I try not to memorize what they are. And so when I go down this list of 150 potential ingredients, um, very often I'll use a pendulum. And I don't know if any of your listeners or viewers might be familiar with a pendulum. It could truly, I don't know if I've got one right here, but it could be as simple as a necklace that you wear, something that you can hold. Um, when I was first learning, I used a necklace. Some people like to use a washer or a ring suspended from a
Oh,
string. It
yeah.
can be super simple. Um,
Yeah.
that's just my divination tool. You mentioned tarot cards. Some people really like tarot or oracle cards.
Yeah.
You would think that I would, being a very visual person,
Yeah.
but I just connect so deeply and easily with a pendulum.
Yeah.
So the way a pendulum works is it's suspended and it will swing one way or another. One way it will indicate your positive or your yes answer. If it swings a different way, it could be your no answer. Um, so I use my pendulum as I'm going down this list, and that's how I know for sure
Oh, cool.
that it's not just me making stuff up. And so when I look at the list and I go to pull those jars of herbs and blend them all together and say I'm making a manifestation incense, um, it's mind blowing what the ingredients will tell you. This one's for wealth. This one's for money. This one's for, um, physical health or different things that we might want to manifest. at the same time, when we're talking about manifesting anything, and let me back up the bus. You want to make sure that you're not just saying, oh, okay, great spirit, I want an abundance. This full moon, I'm manifesting abundance. Well, girlfriend, you might get an abundance of dust bunnies. So you need to be super specific about what you
Right.
want an abundance of. Do you want an abundance of good friends? Do you want an abundance of cash in the bank? An abundance of food in your pantry? Let's get specific.
Mm.
So when I'm building any of my products, I want to make sure two things. One is that if we are calling in, if we're manifesting something, we may need to release what no longer serves us so that we can make some room
Yeah.
for what we want to come in to land. Does that make sense?
Yes, it
And
does.
on the flip side, what I think is even more important is when we're doing any kind of clearing or releasing work, we want to make super sure that we're filling that void back up. So if you consider the example of, say, you're at the ocean, you're digging a hole right by the water, you turn around to check on your blanket, you turn back to your hole, and it's already filled in. This happens because, again, everything is energy. Say you go through smudging your space and it feels super delicious and yummy and clear, and you come back in the next day and you're like, what the heck? It feels like 10 times worse than it did before. Well, it probably does, because the next bit of energy that flew by was like, aha, here's a nice empty space for me to snuggle into. And
Yeah.
it plops right in. So when I'm preparing any of my products, I include, I call it kind of a fail safe, but it's a sacred space holder that's going to hold that space sacred for whoever's using the product until they know for sure what they want. And if it turns out they never know what they want, it's still going to have their back. They're not going to be feeling that yucky feeling like they did something wrong or it didn't work, um,
Right.
because it's all about the energy and being specific about what we
Mm.
want to call in, and knowing that sometimes it's okay to let go.
That's so good. And one of the things that, well, there's so many questions I have for you, but one thing that came to mind was I remember somebody was telling me about they were doing like clearing on themselves, like cord cutting and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that for a while there, they weren't refilling it with,
Uh-huh.
divine light and love, and they were
Right.
eating. They were actually had like an appetite that couldn't be,
Be stopped. Right.
be stopped. So they were overeating. And I think
Because they
part of
were
that,
filling that
yeah. Oh,
void.
I just got goosebumps from that. But yeah, that was interesting. And yeah, so it just kind of made me think of that. And then the other thing I want to mention, just for our listener at home, if they want to play with a pendulum,
Yes.
it's so fun. Do it, but definitely practice some yes or no's, which things that
Oh,
you know are
yeah.
already true, like your name and where you're born and things like that, so that you
Right.
can gauge yes or no before you get started. So that's just if
Right.
people are wanting to do beginner kind of stuff. So listen, Deb, I do want to talk to you a little bit more about, you keep talking about personal magic. So I do want to go there in a moment.
Okay.
I
Okay.
also want to ask you a little bit more about whether or not you can kind of talk about what energy alchemy is, but I do want to just kind of leave the conversation of divination tools. Do you mind just talking briefly on what a divination tool is?
Sure. Sure. Well, divination, again, root word coming from the divine, would be a way to connect with our higher self. It's that knowledge that, in the way I believe, what makes sense to me is
Mhm.
that we're born with this knowledge bank. I don't believe that God or anybody would send us here completely unprepared. I mean, life on earth is a really tough gig, and
Yeah.
You know, you don't just send your kid off to kindergarten without a backpack or lunch. So, you know, I feel like we've got this data bank within us somewhere of the tools that we need to make it through. And so divination could be things like, some people like to use crystals. And I have a very good friend who uh, knows so much about crystals. And I usually defer to her. I know what I like. I know what looks pretty to me. I know what feels good to me. But again, that's very instinctive, very intuitive. Other people will use oracle cards. I think you mentioned tarot cards, and this is one of the decks I love.
It's a beautiful deck.
So, you know, you would maybe go through and shuffle your cards, pick a card of the day, and the way I was taught is, I mean, I love a good, most of the decks come with these cute little books that you could go through and you match it up to the card that you pulled, and great way to start. But as you and I were talking a teeny bit before we started, another really good way is to work with the cards intuitively. And what on that particular card draws your attention. So it may be the fact that the beaver is wearing a crown today. So maybe it's your day to feel like a queen. Or, you know,
treat
the
yourself
rabbit.
like a queen. Go
Exactly.
shopping at Enchanted Botanicals.
There you go.
Yeah.
You know, so again, that goes back to running something through your filter. What works for you?
Yes.
Start with the guidebook as a jumping off point, but quickly gain your, you know, let go of the training wheels and realize that that knowledge is already within you. So oracle cards are a great divination tool. A pendulum just happens to be my go-to. Again, I came to that late in life, after I had finished all of my chemotherapy, and my godmother said, well, you know, you're probably going to want to be careful about, you know, taking the right nutrients and blah, blah, blah. And here's how you test for it. And so I literally was using a necklace, and I would hold it, and I'm just looking. I don't want to leave the screen, but I could just run around the corner and grab my pendulum. But anyway, that's my go-to. There are muscle testing is another great, easy way.
Yes.
I think it's called kinesiology. And one
homeopathy uses a lot of muscle testing. But
muscle
just the
testing,
practice,
and
I guess kinesiology is the practice of it.
right. Well, and another fun way, which I've taught my my nephew, because you know he doesn't want to be seen doing any of this stuff, but you could hold your fingers together. I don't know if, let's see, like this.
Yeah.
And the theory is, if you ask yourself a question, do I like, so for me, you kind of program yourself and you say, okay, my yes answer is going to be, when I pull my fingers, they're not going to want to come apart super easily. If my no will be this. So you could start with simple things like, is my name Deb? Yes. Is my name Lauren? And the more you do it, the more you realize, wait a minute, I'm really not focusing on doing that. It's just happening. So you could say, you know, should I eat that third helping of bread today? And you're probably going to get a no answer.
Oh, I'm like, yes. Is the answer yes?
I am always yes on the bread. But say you going back to going to the garden center, and you're kind of, you know, you're looking at the different plants and you're thinking, this Artemisia is talking to me, but my garden designer said I really need marigold. What should I do? So you could go over, you could sit with the marigold and say, are you the plant that needs to come home with me, and get a
Yeah.
yes or no. And this is
I love
pretty,
that.
I mean, it's pretty subtle. Not too many people are going to know what you're doing if,
Yeah, that's true. You can be discreet about it. So just for our listener at
exactly.
home who's listening on the podcast, so
Yes.
we actually have recorded a video, so you can go to the Afterlight YouTube channel and you can actually watch us. But if you aren't going to do that, so what's Deb's basically doing is she's taking her thumb and her, is that your forefinger?
Pointer. Yeah. Your pointer finger and your
pointer
thumb.
finger, putting
Make
them
a
together like
circle.
kind of a circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you're
And then,
making that okay sign. And
yes.
then loop your other thumb and forefinger through it. So you've made almost a figure 8. So you've
Yes.
interconnected all 4 of those fingers, 2 thumbs, 2 pointers. And then you're going to want to pull opposite. So your left hand pulls to the left, your right hand pulls to the right.
Yes.
And when your fingers separate easily, for me, that's a no answer.
Okay.
When they don't want to separate very easily, that's my yes.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
that's
and
really
again, very
cool.
subtle. It's something that you can do down in your lap, or,
Yeah. Yeah. I've also known, because I did my Theta Healing Level 1 course. And one of the things we did is we actually like stood straight, and then you could do your yes or no based on whether or not you lean forward or backward.
Yes.
So, and I
Yes.
think it comes down to what you were saying before, and what we're kind of drilling in here is that, you really do find your own truth and your own way. And Deb, you have this really natural way of making everything sound super exciting. So, really, it's just kind of like try it all out, isn't it? It's all
Yeah.
fun. And then, because sometimes you might not have your pendulum or your oracle cards
Right.
near you. And you might not want to do the finger testing, but you could lean forward and backwards and not
Exactly.
really look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, do what works in the moment, do what works for you. And
Yeah.
most of all, don't stress about it. I
Yeah.
mean,
Find the
gosh.
joy for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go into a little bit about, can you kind of define, or is there a sort of a definition for what energy alchemy is about? Like, or what
Well,
it is
yep.
exactly?
There are lots of people who practice some form of energy alchemy, and they're beautiful words, aren't they? I love how they
They
sound
are.
together, energy alchemy.
Yes.
So I was actually fortunate enough to trademark, and it's now a registration, my form of energy alchemy, which is how I work with the energy of the land. And there's something called geopathic stress. It is naturally occurring. It has nothing to do, well, generally not too much to do with energy, like power lines, with underground things. Geopathic stress is, you can think of, if you think of the earth like a huge human body, and how the human body has a skin. It's got capillaries, it's got larger waterways, which are the veins, and the largest ones, which are the arteries. And it's got lungs that breathe. And, sometimes we have deep water. And the earth is very much the same. We are built along the same pattern as the earth. And so what I do is look at how the earth as a body may be impacting the people who live above it. And when we are out of balance, just like when we're out of balance with a family member, tempers rise, people don't feel well. And it's the same thing. So with the earth, just like we have a nervous system, the earth has a nervous system. And you can kind of look at it as maybe a large fishing net that you would place over a ball, a beach ball, and how it's got all of the different lines that run around that ball in different directions. And So the earth has a grid lines, grid system that envelops it. And each one of these lines can carry energy. It can carry energy that is negative, that is beneficial, detrimental, neutral, and an energy line can be all of those things to different people in the same household. So my job is to connect with the land by working with these energy lines. Some people will call them ley lines. They're actually a teeny bit different. Ley lines generally tend to be lines that run through sacred sites. So if you think of Stonehenge, or in Australia, it would be, is it Uluru?
Yes, Ayers Rock.
Yes, Ayers Rock
Yeah,
would be a sacred site.
yeah.
So if you were to look on a map and connect that with other worldwide sacred sites, you could track that. So one of the lines that I work with, being in the States, runs through the southeast, the southern portion of England. So it runs through Stonehenge. It runs through about 50 other sacred sites, meaning cathedrals, churches, towns that are all built on, it's called the Michael and Mary line. So Archangel Michael. And a lot of the church sites were actually built on these pagan worship sites with the intention that in just a few generations, the people would have forgotten why they were going to that site, but now they would be going there because it was a Catholic church or an Anglican church or a Lutheran church or whatever it was, when in reality, it started as an ancestral worship site or whatever it was. Anyway, so this line runs across the Atlantic Ocean through one of our northern cities, Boston, which you've probably heard of being from Canada. So it
Yep.
runs down through Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, which is where I am, and then down through Atlanta, continues back on around the world. And one of my theories is that, and I like to use, it's a very sad example, but I think it's pretty strong. If you remember when the Syrian refugee camps were set up a few years ago,
Yep.
and the human suffering that was taking place on that piece of land. And again, if you consider that um, emotions are an energy form, and we can't destroy or create energy, we can only transform it. So
Yes.
when those desperate emotions were being released, the earth was absorbing it, which is her job. And she does so gladly. My job is to help her filter that. So that human suffering, those strong, deep emotions were sinking into these energy lines and traveling around the earth. Well, now, who could be living on top of that energy line 3,000 miles away? Could be being impacted by that energy that was traveling underneath their house. And so, how do you know that you're being impacted? Well, you might suddenly start having headaches. You may be arguing with your partner or your children. Your animals may be becoming ill. You may be trying to have a baby, but you can't. You know, you're suffering some infertility problems. And
Wow.
so, again, my job is to connect with the earth, figure out, and what I do is I actually take a person's plot of land, and I can do this by Google, just by them giving me their address, and I find out, I get the Google map of where they live, I print it out, and then I again, using my pendulum, I map out where do these energy lines crisscross through their property. In one case I did in DC, this couple desperately wanted a baby. And when I mapped out and she was telling me all of these, really sad, she was maybe 31 and she was having like these old lady symptoms, the poor little thing. And when I mapped out the energy, it was running right through her side of the bed, right where her reproductive organs would lie when she was in bed at night.
Oh my
So
God.
I was able to work with those energies, clear them. 2 months later, I kid you not, baby, she was pregnant. Yep.
That's absolutely
So
amazing.
yeah, so that's my job, is to work with a person's energy and get that in balance with the energy of the earth. So
Wow,
it's
that is
really sacred
fascinating.
work. I'm passionate about it. And um, yeah, it's really good and holy and important work, I think.
It is, and it's fascinating. You know what? When we were first talking as well, I kind of made a mental note to sort of ask you about, you know, it seems as though when we're nurturing plants and we're growing things that, we're giving back to Mother Earth in that way. But then
Yes.
I did want to kind of ask you whether or not there were other things that you recommend that people do to be able to kind of balance the giving and the taking from Mother Earth. And so it sounds to me like that's obviously something that you're doing that's just incredible work. So, are there things that you can recommend that other people do as well that kind of give back to Mother Earth in the way that they feel
Sure.
comfortable? If
Sure. Yeah,
yeah,
simple things. If you're on your daily walk, take a little trash bag with you every now and then and just pick
yeah,
up the trash. I know it's gross, it's disgusting, it's somebody else's, but if they're not going to be responsible, um, that's
yeah.
something easy. We can, um, I work a lot with the elementals, with the fairy realm, which is not the same as Tinkerbell. It's more like the spirits of um, the genus loci, which is spirit of place, spirit of location, um, the spirit of the plants. And every now and then they like a little piece of cake, or they might like, a little sip of wine, or they're especially fond of milk, or feed the birds, or as you're, just going past a tree, just tell it how beautiful you think it is. And that kind of communication, I don't want to freak people out, because
They're probably of a
do it in
certain
your head.
mindset if they're listening to this.
I mean, you don't have
Yeah.
to say it out loud if
Yeah.
you're walking down a busy street and you're suddenly talking to the
You're
birds and
beautiful.
right. No, in your mind is good.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
tree
With
will
this
hear you.
intention.
But everybody likes a little compliment now and then.
Yeah.
And so, or when you're picking a flower from the field or your garden, um, sometimes I'll just say, golly, you are so pretty today, or
Mhm.
thank you. Thank you for letting me work with you. Thank you for, offering yourself for this work. So, yeah,
That's so wonderful. Well, we have just a few minutes left. I could talk to you forever. I do want to talk on the subject. It's kind of hard to talk about everything that you're doing,
I
especially
know.
energy alchemy is a fascinating conversations. I don't know if maybe we just connect again in, later in the year and we talk about that kind of maybe more exclusively or something because it's so amazing. But I do want to talk to you about personal magic a little bit as well,
Okay.
if we can, because I'm kind of fascinated by that. And I guess it's sort of, in line with what seems to be the theme today, which is a lot about listening to yourself to kind of
Mhm.
create, a world that you can thrive in. So how do
Right.
you kind of define personal magic?
Well, here's what I think. I think that magic right now seems to be a big catchphrase, as does people labeling themselves as witches, and that may be true, but
Yeah.
there's kind of a difference. There's what I like to say, that we can practice magic or we can be magic. And to be magic is so much simpler. It's to realize that today we had a beautiful sunrise and I got to witness it. Or today my child is coming home from school with a buddy and I'm going to make them cookies because that'll make the house smell good. Or I'm just going to pet my dog a little bit longer. Those kinds of things are, you might chalk it up as just being kind, but they're intentional. And when we do these intentional things, I believe that's personal magic. And I like to call spells, which is also, a current buzzword, it's a prayer with props. And so you might like to build yourself an altar, which is in the interior design world known as a vignette. So a pretty little grouping on your coffee table could be your altar. And perhaps you've got a candlestick, which represents the element of fire. And you've got a book, which could represent the element of air, because air is the element that relates to thought. And you might have a crystal, which is all about the element of earth. And say, a reed diffuser or something with liquid, or a bowl with some water that has plants in it, element of water. That might be your altar. An altar is any place that you can use as a point of focus. When you're meditating, when you're praying, when you're just thinking, when you're being still. So that to me is personal magic. It's, how do I elevate my vibe? How do I begin or continue on this process of not only bettering myself, but helping to raise up other souls? Because there's that old saying that a rising tide raises all ships. And when the tide raises, everybody raises. So just by doing what you're doing, Lauren, you're raising the tide. You are elevating the people who are listening to you and watching you and connecting with you. So you've got a lot of personal magic going on. And so for the people who are listening, I wouldn't get all hot and bothered about not knowing exactly what it means. But it means being that beautiful being that you were born to be, and living your purpose, which does not mean that we've got a whole world now full of Mother Teresas. But we've got a world full of people who like to make quilts and donate them to the Children's Hospital. We've got people making care boxes for veterans. We've got, people doing Habitat for Humanity. All of that is personal magic too, as well as the little things like creating an altar and collecting rocks and talking to plants.
I love it so much. It sounds like a lot of nurturing, self-care, and, giving to the community around you is sort of what it sounds like, to, in simpler terms, I suppose. Yeah.
That's personal magic. And, we can practice magic by doing formal spells or following the cycles of the moon. And I love that too. But personal magic is about finding what resonates with you and doing that. Do you like crystals? Do you like, feeding birds? All of those kinds of things.
Yeah, because I think sometimes especially with information overload, we sometimes
Mhm.
go, I don't know where to begin. And so I don't do anything at all.
Exactly. Right,
Yeah.
right. Don't fear that.
Made it easy.
Don't fear that. Just bake cookies if that's what you like to do, but be the best chocolate chip cookie maker you can be. Save the
Yeah.
world one cookie at a time, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you might be a kitchen witch, um,
Mm.
which is somebody who just loves to cook for the fun of it and really gets into formulating different recipes. I am not.
Yeah.
I am not a kitchen witch. I hate to
Yeah,
cook.
I'm not either, but I'm a good kitchen eater
There
or
you
witch
go.
eater or whatever.
There you go. There you go. But I bet
Whatever term
you
insert.
might be a tech witch, or you might be, um, a green witch would be someone who loves to work with plants. There are all kinds of, and the word witch, I don't want people to get, all freaked out about that word too, but it's an ancient word that came from the term for healer. And it was the wise woman who lived in the villages that people would go to for medical help before there were doctors. She would be the midwife. She would be the woman who made the salves and the balms for burns and bruises. And somehow that word became bastardized and became a bad thing. And a lot of people are now jumping on the witchy bandwagon, which, hello, hand raised, I'm there too. But I like to use it in the authentic, in the original, way back machine version of what it means to be a healer, to be a way shower, um, to be one who's on a journey, one who's connected with the gifts from the earth.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, I know that's a long, a long way to describe personal magic. I'm sorry.
I love it so much. I could listen to you speak forever, Deb. You have just such a poetry about how you speak, and you're so articulate.
Oh
Thank you so
gosh,
much for sharing.
thank you,
Yeah,
Lauren. This was such a magical, really, truly a magical. Now I'm going to get all
I
teary.
know. I'm really glad I decided to start doing these on video.
Yeah, sorry everybody who's watching us. Cut.
It's so funny, I think. Yeah, it's so funny when like, people speak and then they connect with your heart and your soul. And, I think like so many of us have just been yearning for our way. And yeah, I think your definition of personal magic and just everything that you've shared today is just like empowered me and like our listener at home to just, find their own way and to know that whatever is their own truth is completely safe and acceptable if it's in line with them.
And important. It's
Yeah, and
important.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, we need, people who've got all of these other talents. We need good moms. We need good bus drivers. We need, good McDonald's people.
Yeah.
If you love what you're doing, you're living your purpose. And it doesn't have to be, Mother Teresa or president of this country or that country. Um, you can literally be one small flame. And once we all start lighting our flames, that's how we build that light. So,
That's such
yeah,
a beautiful visual to end on. So, Deb, how can people get a hold of you?
sure.
I will tell you while you were talking, I was like, I'm going to spend some of my Christmas money at your shop.
I
So
ship internationally.
fabulous. So, how can people get a hold of you? And also, if they're wanting to pick up a copy of the book, is it an ebook? Is it a physical book?
It's a
Can you
physical
tell?
book. I wish I could show it to you, but I just sent out my last copy yesterday and I've got more coming. They're being shipped from the printer, so they'll be here any day. Um,
Fabulous.
so you can reach me on my website is enchanted botanicals with an s.com. You can find me on Instagram at Enchanted Botanicals. You can, let's see, how else? You can email me at hello@enchanted-botanicals, but you can find that on my website.
Yes, I'll put
And
all the links to this too in the
okay,
show
yeah,
notes,
great.
so it's
Thank
all in
you.
one easy place. You can head to Deb's shop through that as well. I know she's also got an Etsy store. Yeah, so that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
What's
you,
next for
Lauren.
you, Deb? What's next for you?
Oh gosh, what is next? Well, I've just done a nice little brand refresh. So
Ooh,
I've got a lot of new products in my head waiting to get into my hands, and pretty soon it'll be time to get back out in the garden. So that's always what's next.
yeah, fabulous. Well, thank you so much. Keep us
Lauren, thank
posted
you.
on your journey.
I will. Thank you so much.